having recently recorded audio for an updated version of my top 10 favorite novels of all time, I decided to think over what I presume to be the 10 worst books. These are all novels that I've read in my 21 years of life, and I suppose maybe 10 years of avid reading. I do have some order to these books because, I suppose they sort of follow, they don't follow a chronological order necessarily, but some I read early on, and others I read just about maybe a few weeks ago. So there's a terrific range of material here that I will describe accordingly. So I figured, why prevaricate around the bush any longer? Let's just get it over with. So, number 10 is a surprise, you might think, because considering how much I love Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, how much I venerate The Lost World as the greatest fiction work ever to be written by any human being, I find that indeed he was capable of writing something that was basically not garbage, but just an ineptitude on his part. And that book is A Study in Scarlet. Yes, this is the very first novel in which Sherlock Holmes figures. Now, this was also his first long-form narrative to see publication. He published a few short stories before that time, and he had worked on a work that had actually been lost in the post called The Narrative of John Smith. I've read excerpts from that, and that seems way better than this here. Now, I must confess, I've only read the first two Sherlock Holmes novels, this one, The Sign of the Four, and maybe select short stories from the adventures. And this is the reason why I haven't ventured further into Holmes. Because, well, the first half of this book is fairly compelling, I must say, even though it is an introductory volume to the characters of John H. Watson and Sherlock Holmes. And the mystery itself is fairly intriguing, although it's been like several years since I read this. I read this first in 2014, back when I had come off of a stint of vowing never to read anything else by Conan Doyle. Because The Lost World was so great, I had perceived that nothing else could even begin to compete with it. Turns out I was right. And this book, about halfway through, for some reason turned into, I kid you not, a John Wayne movie. And was just abominably boring. This was not at the height of my atheism when I read this, but let's just say this was before I got involved with debating people about religion, which was about when I was 17. I was 14 at the time of reading this. And the whole Mormonism thing while it may well be interesting from a Christian perspective, I may need to actually go back and reread that. To me, it was just a slog and not very good at all. The Sign of the Four, which I read shortly after that, was slightly better, but not by much, I'd say. Once again, I read these things over 8 years ago, and they desperately deserve a reread. I will hopefully very soon, maybe in December, I do not know, marathon all of the home stories. Because, yes, Conan Doyle is my favorite author, and I intend to read everything he's written, and that does include all of his home stuff. So that's number 10. Number 9 is a recent read. It is part of the utopian subgenre from the 19th century. And this is an odd one because it comes from a man who had actually written one of my favorite books in recent years, Green Mansions. But the particular book here that will be placed on the chopping block is A Crystal Age by William Henry Hudson. This was, I believe, his second novel, quickly following The Purple Land. I've not read that, but I intend to at some point. But this book here, it's a very strange narrative. Basically, this man, I suppose, is examining specimens of plants. He's a botanist in some unknown country, probably someplace in South America, because obviously that's where William Henry Hudson was from. He was British extraction, but spent most of his time in Argentina. And basically, I suppose he falls down a gorge and is knocked out for who knows how many years and wakes up in this future society where there's all sorts of weird stuff. I believe people, instead of living in cities, they live in families, and houses, I suppose, are like under cities. They all have one common language, which is, instead of the English language, it's known as the human language. And I think maybe the one, well, they also, there's this weird ceremony that they partake in with like a bighorn cow or something of that sort. And I think the one thing that stood out from the book most that they believe in is basically they decided to stop having children for some reason. I don't know why. I forget why this is. I read this fairly recently, about a year ago. And the main reason why I disliked it so much, it had great moments in it. But the main reason why I disliked it is because, well, I'm going to spoil the ending. So if you want to read this, if I've not put you off from wanting to read it, perhaps maybe mute the video and then come back another time. But the book just... okay, so it's being narrated in the first person by this botanist who's in this future society. And basically, I guess, I'm not sure exactly how this happens, but he ends up taking some or another form of poison, and he basically describes that he's dying, and basically the end of the narrative is, I suppose, his own mind shutting down. And I was saying, what on earth is this? How was this even written if he died in this manner? And it was just a mess, in my opinion. This was actually the second utopian I read right after Erewhon by Samuel Butler, and it was not necessarily a very good one. I haven't read much utopian since then, except, of course, the ones by H.G. Wells, which I described in my previous video. It's very beautifully written, though, I can tell you that. Anything by William Henry Hudson is guaranteed to be resplendent in prose. So that's number 9. Number 8 may well be familiar to you. This book I read, it was actually the first book I read in 2020 when I made a vow to read a book every day of that year. I was very unsuccessful, but I did read quite a bit that year. And this one, I suppose, marked off the beginning of that year. And it is The Shawl by Cynthia Ozick. I believe in my review I kept pronouncing it Cynthia Ozick, but now, having watched the Reading Fabricators review of it, I now know it's pronounced Ozick. It's Holocaust literature. You know my opinions on Holocaust literature are not very high, and basically nothing happens in it, I find, that is of note. And it was just really a waste of like 30 minutes or however long it took me to read the thing. I didn't even finish the book, I don't think. I don't remember. And it basically made me quit reading Holocaust literature, even though I do intend to re-examine The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. And Ahab has told me that that is actually quite a worthy piece to consider, so I may do that. But for now, I'm going to stave off of Holocaust literature for a bit. Number 7 is one I actually did a review on as well. You can go and check that out if you'd like. And that is November by Gustave Flaubert. Now, the reason why I suppose I dislike this book so much is because, well, the one word that, of all in the dictionary, that I could handpick to describe this is navel-gazing. That's all it was. There was, I suppose, an underlying plot to it. I forget what that plot is, because it's been over almost 3 years since I read that thing. But it was basically just subsumed by this very inextricable morass, whatever it is, morass, that's how you say it. This very inextricable morass of just over-description, overwrought sentences and prose and pontifications that really did not serve the narrative at all whatsoever. And the fact that it's called November and it doesn't even take place in November, the month isn't even mentioned, just set me off. And I'm very afraid to actually read Madame Bovary or Sentimental Education or anything else by him because of this. That's 7. Number 6 is a short story collection, actually, that I've read parts of, but I haven't read the whole thing. I don't intend on reading the whole thing. But this here is 10th of December by George Saunders, contemporary author. And I just don't like his writing, to be honest with you. It struck me as very juvenile. It relied far too much on unnecessary profanity. Now, I don't have that big of a problem with profanity in fiction. You can use it, I suppose, to in dialogue, and to some extent, I mean, if a person is thinking Yes, you can use it in prose, but in the way to describe something, and also just like just the general mechanics of the thing, I find is just really intolerable. In fact, the one sentence I remember out of that book that just struck me as utterly puerile was, "What a what a cluster F." And indeed, that book was very much a cluster F. And I'm never going to read anything by him again. So there's that. Now we're on to the top five. These are the ones that basically will pretty much never change. And I'll just get into them. So number five is The Outsider, or its American title, The Stranger, by Albert Camus. And I had to read this for a class, my advanced literature class in high school, and basically write a paper on it. And I had a choice between this book and I can't remember the other ones. And I figured, well, this was actually one of Dean Goronitis' favorite books. If you don't know who Dean Goronitis is, he's basically the patron saint of booktube. He's possibly the greatest booktuber who ever lived. He did the Saturday Sit Down and all that, and basically a wonderful person all around. I recommend his books to or his videos to anyone. I don't think he does videos anymore. It's very sad that he doesn't. And I actually did some investigation of my own, and apparently he owns and operates a coffee shop, which good for him, I suppose. But hopefully, it's been almost 9 years, but hopefully maybe soon he'll buckle down and get back to doing some book reviews. But this was actually one of his favorite books, and it deals quite a bit with existentialism, existentialist philosophy, and all that. And at the time, I had known one of my English teachers from the past had been very much into existentialism. She was into Dostoevsky and Sartre, and also Camus. And so I decided to basically read this for my advanced literature that year. And the story was fine, and the writing was good, but this book just brought me down. It really made me feel depressed. This was actually the first book that elicited a emotional reaction from me. I did not feel happy reading this book at all. I was just so depressed. I even told this to my advanced literature teacher at the time, and she said, "Well, it's good that you feel that way because it reminds you that you're indeed a human." And I didn't think that I was capable of doing such a thing, and it was indeed very comforting to be reminded of that, I find. But I don't think I will read this book again, mainly because it made me feel so melancholy and just lugubrious. So, I don't know. Maybe one of these days I may just rip through it, and hopefully it won't be as unendurable an experience. We'll see. Right, so number four is actually a recent read that I read yesterday at the time of recording this. This is Friday, the 14th of October, 2022, at 2:52 in the morning that I'm recording this. Goodness me. And this book here, In the Winter Dark, by Tim Winton. Perhaps the worst book by an Australian author that I've ever read. And it was just so disappointing, so terribly written. Anybody could have written this book. I kid you not. And also, I did a review of this, and the supposed creature, this mysterious creature that's said to be haunting this valley that these characters inhabit, is never revealed. It is said to be, it is implied to be some sort of a big cat or something, which is also quite disappointing because I presumed it to be a yowie, which, if you don't know what a yowie is, it's basically the Australian equivalent of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. But it's never revealed, and the writing's just bad, and it's a very short book. That's probably the best thing about it. It won't take you very long to read, but at the same time, once you read it, you will probably not go on to read anything else by this man, Tim Winton here. Utterly terrible book. Number 3, at the time of recording this, I do not have the review up yet. Maybe I will by the time I post this. I do not know. But I'd recorded a review for this back in December 2020. And the phone on which it's stored is, the screen and LCD are broken and they need to be repaired. And once I get that done, I'll be able to extract the file from it and then upload it onto the channel. But that book is Oh, What a Paradise It Seems by John Cheever. Nothing happened in this book. Just nothing happened at all. There was no point to reading it. That's all I can say about it. Really, that's all I remember about it. But that's about it. Okay, number 2 is another recent read. And the reason I read it is because, well, where I live, there are not many books that are set in or centered around, or novels anyway, that are set in or centered around New Zealand. And I actually had to buy this one online. That's how rare it is to track down. And I had heard about this one many years ago, and it's suspected that, well, it's a contemporary novel. It'll probably not be that well written, but it may at the very least be slightly interesting. And it wasn't either of those. And that book is Nobody's Ever Missing by Catherine Lacey. This book is written in stream of consciousness, which is a literary form that I have mixed opinions about. In some instances, like in the work of Patrick White, it can work exceptionally well, but in others, like this, it is the worst thing you will ever read. This book, I think, to emulate the sentiments of a Goodreads reviewer, felt as though it were written by a 12-year-old. There was run-on sentence after run-on sentence after run-on sentence, and there were even bits in there that seemed as though that they had gone by unedited. One that springs to mind in particular is, I went to the garden to do what I was going to do in the garden, or something like that. Terrible. And also the way this narrator describes New Zealand is very it's very let's just say unsympathetic. It's as though she has no love for the country at all. And I took quite a bit of umbrage from that. And really, it was just a thoroughly unpleasant experience. There were some moments in there that could be considered great, but it was just it was just swamped in all this inanity that really, it just It threw me off reading for a while, to be honest with you. And I still have the book, but I may well reread it just to maybe do a review of it. I do not know. And then after that, I'll probably just give it to the Bargain Book World, because I can't stand having that book in my library any longer. Alright, so number one, the absolute worst book I've ever read. This one here is inexcusable. This book will forever go down in history as the one that infuriated me the most. I've done a review of it. I've beaten the ever-living daylights out of it on film, yet I still have the book because it was a gift. And that book obviously is The Gorilla Hunters by R.M. Ballantyne. Were everyone in this house not asleep, even though I'm out in the garage, I would go over the top and would basically be screaming at just how much I hated this book. The sole reason why is because it is a very shameful forgery of Paul du Chaillu's explorations and adventures in equatorial Africa. Everything that happens in that book occurs in this one. And there's even descriptions that are taken directly from du Chaillu and are modified in a way that basically perverts them and makes them less good, in a sense. And the actual plot of the book, when you get down to it, is quite boring and just really just obscurantical. You wonder at all what this writer was thinking. There were moments in this book where I was thinking, oh my goodness, is du Chaillu going to appear? If he did, it may well have improved the narrative. But unfortunately, he did not. But once again, Ballantyne had made it a point to make his books as accurate as possible, and I suppose that means incorporating everything he read into his work, and to a greater extent, basically plagiarizing du Chaillu. If you want to read that book, read du Chaillu's Explorations and Adventures in Equatorial Africa and skip it by any means. It's just so awful, inexcusable, forgery. It is. It's not even a novel, and I will never read it again. Nor, I don't think, will I read anything by R.M. Ballantyne, not even The Coral Island. I don't know. We'll see. But anyhow, those are the 10 worst books I've ever read, 10 worst novels, anyhow, and my voice is fairly, it's waning quite a bit because I've been talking for so long, and I'm going to go ahead and stop and rest my voice. I'll edit this all together and hopefully have it posted sometime soon. I don't know when, but hope you enjoyed. Hope you have a good morning, midday, afternoon, evening, midnight, whenever you happen to see this. And I will be signing off here now. Cheers.